Or cry to enter? You had me at crying.
Start on the presentation. Well, good afternoon. Pleased you could join us today. And on behalf of Olin Business School, I'm the Dean of Olin Business School, Mark Taylor, and our distinguished executive residents and the founder of the Olin Award, Dick Mahoney, we welcome you to our luncheon. And today we're going to feature Dr. Arun Gopalakrishnan, sorry I keep running over that wonderful name, at our 10th annual Olin Award winner. Dr. Gopalakrishnan will be talking with us today about the winning research paper he submitted this year. The Olin Award was created, as I said, by Dick Mahoney, who is not only our distinguished executive in residence, but a former CEO of Monsanto. And Dick created this award 10 years ago now because he wanted to reward research, to reward and highlight research generated by faculty of the Olin Business School that has the greatest potential to impact and enhance business results. And as it happens, I became Dean 4 months ago now in December, and we're in the midst of our future planning process and thinking about a vision and mission for the school. And currently the vision that we're thinking of for the school is that we should be producing world-changing education, research and business impact. Right, this exactly fits into the vision of the school. It's also going forward. This year we received about 20 submissions by faculty members, and the winning paper was selected by a committee of high-level business executives who are looking at the research for its potential to impact business. And we thank them all for their involvement in reviewing those submissions this year. The award comes with a generous honorarium, $10,000, a crystal award which is presented to Arun, and the addition of the winner's name to a recognition plaque, which we're currently in the process of revamping and redesigning, and which will be displayed in the faculty seminar room. This is a very prestigious award. The school takes very seriously, and we're very proud of the research that is submitted and that is honoured in this way, and we are very grateful to the vision and the generosity of Dick Mahoney in establishing this award and continuing to support it. So we'll be learning more in a moment about Arun's winning paper, a cross-cohort Changepoint model for customer base analysis. But I just wanted to say, just on a personal level, there are many familiar faces around the room. Some of you are meeting for the first time. Probably too many to go around and introduce ourselves individually. But we thank you for your ongoing support of the school as part of our community, whether it be guests, a corporate friend, alumni, faculty and staff. Something that I've been struck by coming here as a new dean is the quality of our faculty, which is absolutely outstanding. We just had a faculty meeting this morning to discuss a promotion case, and looking at the way their faculty set themselves extremely high standards in terms of what they demand of themselves and what they demand of people to achieve promotion, to come up through the system, from assistant to associate professor to full professor, which makes my life relatively easy in that sense, that the job is done to some extent by our senior associate dean of research, but it's also done by faculty actually imposing a very high standard themselves. Many of the former and future Olin Award winners are with us today, members of our faculty. And I want to encourage those faculty here today who are not award winners, previous award winners, to consider taking the time to write a short cover letter and submit your research in next year's annual Olin Award competition. In fact, you can be a serial award winner if more than one time. Yeah.
Apparently not 3 times.
So, if you feel we can be of greater service to your organisation, things like our corporate friends here, and if you particularly would like you may be interested in the research being here presented here today. We certainly do have that as our strategic vision, producing world-changing business education, research and impact. We do want very much serious about working with you, so please feel free to contact with Dorothy Kidnap and Corporate Relations in the first instance. So, after Dr. Gopalakrishnan has shared some details of his research, we'll open it up for a general discussion. I'm free to ask some questions. But let me just say a few words of introduction to Arun. About Arun. Arun has a deep passion for linking his research to classroom excellence and creating real business impact. He is a little bit unusual, I suppose, as an academic, in that he has spent a number of years working in industry, in research and development, as well as in marketing for both Motorola and DuPont. He's published papers since he became an academic, and his PhD from Wharton a few years ago, provided a lot of actionable insight to managers, incorporating cutting-edge academic research and real practical insight. And his teaching also at the undergraduate level and at the advanced graduate level is inspirational. His love and research was on big data analytics, which I think and we think is an important, a really important avenue of research and teaching going forward. It's one that we will be expanding and developing in the school. Arun's PhD from Wharton was focused on modelling, understanding and managing customer behaviour. And since then he's published a number of outstanding articles in Marketing Science, for example, a leading journal for marketing research. And I know one of his publications, which I'm familiar with, demonstrated that consumers systematically make errors in managing their cell phone plans. And I agree, I knew this was the case, but now I know why. And it talks about how managers can help customers learn to be more astute in their decision making. Arun's current research topics include issues such as how to track the trajectory of a customer's relationship with the firm, whether the firm should offer better deals to their best customers, how early stage marketing shapes a customer's future values. Arun joined the faculty in the marketing department in July 2015. I'm delighted that his wife, Divya, who could be here today also, is a PhD student specialising in arts and cultural policy. I know you have two young boys, 6 and 2. I'm also delighted to welcome Arun's father, a very proud father. I'm sure as proud as Arun as we are. So, please welcome Arun Gopalakrishnan, this year's winner.
Let me just turn on my microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to sharing my research with you, and I'm proud to present some research that I've co-authored with two distinguished professors from the Wharton School, Professor Eric Bradlow and Professor Pete Fader, who were both co-chairs of my dissertation committee. So today I'm going to tell you about the business challenges that we wanted to address in our research. So to start off with, we understand that customers are at different stages of the life cycle with a firm. So firms have a mixture of brand new customers who are just acquired, customers who've been around for a little while, as well as long-time customers. So we consider these as cohorts, customers you acquire at different points in time. And we found that current research and models don't really consider the fact that customers at different stages of their tenure with the firm can behave very differently. So that was a challenge that we wanted to take on. Secondly, we also wanted to study a situation where customers don't sign contracts with a firm. So if you think about Netflix, every month when you subscribe to that video streaming service, Netflix knows exactly how many customers they have. On the other hand, if you're shopping for clothes on an e-commerce website, you might shop 1 month and the next month you don't do anything. And the e-commerce retailer doesn't know whether that's because you've churned or because you've just decided to be inactive that month. So the second challenge we wanted to address was trying to solve a situation where a firm doesn't really know whether their inactive customers have churned or are merely dormant. And finally, the third challenge that we wanted to address is one that's very real across many business settings. How do you make forecasts for what your newest customers are going to do. Now, keeping in mind your newest customers, since they're just acquired, are the ones you know the least about. Yet, what a lot of managers want to know is, what can we expect from these newest customers? Can we do anything to shape their value? And so these are the three challenges that inspired us to undertake this research. And in doing so, I want to introduce some terminology that I will refer to in this talk. So the first is cohort. What I mean by that is a group of customers who are all acquired at the same point in time. Right? And what I will also refer to is that these customers may churn or experience attrition. In other words, they decide not to do business with the firm going forward. And finally, I will also talk about this notion of birth. What I mean by that is new customer cohorts are constantly being added over time. And I may refer to that as the birth of a new cohort. Now, to put this all together, I have a visual that I'm going to walk you through. I know it's a little busy, but let's imagine that we collectively founded a new online video streaming service. Right? And in the very first month of our operation, we acquired our first cohort of customers. What we then see in every subsequent month is how many of those customers continue to subscribe to our service, and at the end of the 6th month, we're going to have some fraction of that original first cohort still remaining as customers. But we also add in every subsequent month a new set of customers, a new cohort of customers, and we get to see what that cohort has done over time, all the way up till the most recent point in time where we acquired a bunch of brand new customers. The challenge then is, what do we think this group of customers is going to do in the future? And that is one of the challenges that we are going to tackle over here. Now, I mentioned this problem inspired by an example that kind of resembles Netflix. However, as I mentioned, the challenge is exacerbated when we have a context where we don't know if the customer has churned or not. So if you think about shopping at Amazon, Amazon doesn't really know how many customers they have. So in their annual reports, they mention, we consider a customer as active if they made some purchase in the last 12 months. But that's arbitrary. They don't really know if the customers who didn't buy for more than 12 months are still planning to shop in the future or not. And that is part of the challenge that we are looking to address. So there are a number of settings which fall into the bucket of what I call non-contractual, where there is no contract guiding whether the firm and the customer have a relationship or not. And for example, grocery purchases is one example. You don't sign a contract with Schnucks that, hey, I'm going to shop with you next month and the month after. So Schnucks has to figure out if your intentions are to shop there or not. The mobile streaming, the streaming video example falls into the contractual example, where we know exactly whether you're planning to be a customer or not, because if you don't renew that subscription, it means you're out. And the context that I'm going to talk about today is non-contractual and is in the setting of a nonprofit organization that solicits donations from cohorts of donors that they acquire over time. So that is the setting that I'm going to talk about in terms of the model that we have built. Okay? And what I propose here to address these challenges is a more accurate new modeling tool. What can this tool do for us? For starters, this model is going to provide more diagnostics about what these customer cohorts are like. Are there differences as you acquire customers? Are your newer customers similar to your older customers? Or has that been some kind of regime change where somehow your newer customers are behaving very differently? So this model is going to provide some diagnostics to help understand if there have been any dynamics. Secondly, this is also hopefully going to provide better forecasts for these newest cohorts of customers that the firm has acquired by leveraging some of these deeper insights and diagnostics. Thirdly, what this will lead to is what I hope is a richer dashboard on the health of a customer base. So in typical financial reports, what we see is firms report how many customers they have and how many customers they've added this quarter, the previous quarter. But what we're suggesting here is when you really want to deep dive, you might want to know the health of your customer base by the cohort that they're in. Because your oldest customers, your long-standing customers, you might want to look at them and market to them quite differently from your newest ones. So we hope to expand the dashboard of metrics that firms can use using our model. And finally, our model is available for business use. It is now published in Marketing Science. So anyone can pick this up. And if you would like to talk some more about it, you know how to contact the authors. So this is, in a sense, what I'm going to talk to you about today. And to just kind of give you some context, while we study the nonprofit setting, the model we developed is broadly applicable and is generally applicable to practically any business setting. So the example is a nonprofit, but the model itself is extremely portable to many different settings. So just to give you some context then on the organization that we worked with, this was a public television broadcaster in a major US city. And this organization had a challenge. They produce iconic programs and broadcast them like the PBS NewsHour and Sesame Street. However, they rely heavily on donations to fund parts of their operating budget. So this is a non-contractual setting, as I mentioned. This organization acquires donor cohorts every year, and about 30 to 40% of their operating budget is funded by these donations. So if they know they're going to fall short, they would prefer to know that sooner rather than later because it has real implications for the running of their organization. So therefore, we acquired data on the cohorts that they acquired from 1990 through 2000. So each year, they acquired a set of donors. We acquired that data. And the goal is an accurate forecast of what each and every cohort, particularly the newest set of donors, what are they going to do for this organization in terms of donations. Right? And one of the things that the organization knew was a potential challenge but didn't know how it really affected customers was a regulatory change in 1996. The Telecommunications Act essentially deregulated cable television channels, such that competition for what channels people could watch dramatically increased. So those who were used to watching public television to get their news, now they would have CNN and all of these different channels. So potentially for a nonprofit broadcaster focusing on public television, this may affect the behavior of their donors. They just didn't know how. And that's what we were hoping to solve for them. So to give you some, just some examples of donor patterns that we found, let's dive into people from the 1990 cohort. So I would like you to meet 5 people: Kathy, Rita, Kira, Linda, and Bill. Each of them made their first transaction in the year 1990. Hence, they're part of this cohort of the 1990 donor cohort. But each of them has done different things. So what I have here, 0 means they didn't show up to make a donation in a future year, and 1 means that they did. Okay? And what you see is Bill at the bottom here, after that initial donation, he never showed up. Unfortunately, this is typical of a large part of a customer base. There are a lot of these hit-and-run customers, as you might call them, who, they're not active for a real long time. So that's one type of customer. But you also have Linda, who's been a stellar donor, has gone 9 out of 9 years, seems very, very engaged. And then you have some other types. For example, Kathy. I know we have a Kathy in the room. So let's say Kathy has gone 8 out of 8, and then in the most recent year, she did not donate. So that's one possible pattern. The other is Rita, who's been on and off, but we've seen Rita make a donation in the most recent time of 1999. So I want to get a show of hands. Which of you think Kathy is going to be the more valuable donor for the next 5 years? Raise your hands, comparing Kathy and Rita. Who thinks Kathy is the one that we should bank our money on for the next 5 years? Raise your hands. And who says Rita? Most of you say Rita. So let me talk to, who are my Kathy people here? Nancy, what made you feel Kathy was the better prospect?
Her consistency of giving.
So you like the fact that she's been very consistent up till the most recent time period. And my Rita people, who are my Rita supporters? Ted, what makes you feel Rita is better prospect?
Because she more recently made a donation, so that even if she drops,
Right.
she still comes back on. whereas I'm concerned that Kathy was a break for some time.
Right. So what we have highlighted here is there is this tension between is recency more important or is it about frequency? Because Kathy obviously wins on frequency, and so a manager might say, look, 8 out of 9, how can you go wrong with that? But what Ted's pointing out is a valid concern as well. If she was so good, what happened in the most recent year? Has she churned, basically? Because if she's churned, then we can't really expect much from her, and there is a likelihood that that event may have happened. So that is up. You have a question?
I'd say Rita, because Kathy, she's been so loyal.
Right.
And then there's nothing, okay?
Right.
She did. So there must have been some real good reason that she didn't. Her kids grew up. She doesn't need to watch it anymore. She dies. So I think that it's not a pro-Rita reason that I would vote for Rita. It's an anti-Kathy reason.
Anti-Kathy reason. No offense to Kathy in the room. But that's a very valid point. So the things that our model is going to pick up on, because we don't know for sure what Kathy's intentions are. That's part of this non-contractual situation we're in. We don't know if Kathy's decided to take a temporary break or a permanent break. And so what the model that we build is going to try and figure out is to assign some probabilities for whether Kathy is still going to be around or not. But the intuition that Ted and Bill have here is very valid in that we should be concerned that such remarkable consistency followed by a dramatic change may be indicative that the probability of Kathy having churned without telling the organization is fairly high, in which case we might actually predict that Rita would be, on average, a better donor in the next 5 years compared to Kathy. So these are the sorts of things our model is going to figure out, not just from these examples, but from the entire data set of all of the donors across all of these cohorts. So that's kind of an illustrative example. Here's the question. Do we write Bill off as a donor because he's done absolutely nothing for us? The answer is, unfortunately, since maybe up to 50% of a customer base can comprise of people who make one purchase and then they disappear, some of these people may come back. So it might be a good idea not to write them off completely, but obviously we don't expect, on average, as much as we would from some of the others.
Is there a cost of keeping that person as a donor, or is it just trying to figure out are you getting any money in the future for your business?
So I guess the cost would be how much effort do you want to put into market to try and get some of these people to donate. So that might differ across these.
The cost of chasing Bill.
Indeed. So you might spend a lot of money to try and elicit that donation. You might want to offer a lot of free giveaways and end up increasing the cost of that donation. So agree that there are some implications. So you would want to study these patterns segment by segment to see where's the most value. But this is the kind of data that our model is going to use, and essentially it captures 3 aspects of behavior that are well known in the direct marketing community: recency, frequency, and monetary value. I've heard of RFM, and in that order. So recency does trump frequency. So what our model is going to leverage on is that recency tells us this person was engaged very recently, and that means a lot. And this is why when Olin Business School contacts its alumni to make some donations, I'm not sure exactly what the party line is, but they might say it's not the amount, it's about participation. It's about engagement. Because if you're engaged, then that means a whole lot more than disengaging and so on and so forth. So recency is very, very important. And that's what we're going to leverage. And we see here that each of these donation patterns has different amounts of recency and frequency. And what our model does is it looks at forecasting each and every individual in our data set. And then we're going to aggregate that up to make predictions about the overall customer base. But using our model, if you wanted to say, well, what's Kathy going to do? Our model will have an answer to that as well. Okay? And so we're going to answer questions like who's going to donate more? We're going to make forecasts. And I think the money is on the Ritas, it seems, in the room, and I would agree with that. And we shouldn't necessarily write off the bills, but we'll kind of incorporate what we can expect. So we, though, don't have just one cohort of customers. We have several cohorts of customers. So what I have here is I've rainbow colored the 1990 cohort is colored in red down to the most recent cohort in purple. And what we see is the older the cohort, the more we know about them. And with every subsequent year, we know less and less about the cohort up till the most recent time where, hey, we just acquired this cohort. We don't know a whole lot about them. So what our model is going to have to figure out is, you see that there's different levels of patterns of transactions from these different cohorts. I've normalized them as a percentage of the size of the cohort for comparison. But our model's got to figure out, is there something changing as we acquire these customers? What is driving some of these differences? So that is indeed the intent of our model. And so our total data set comprises about 56,000 odd donors across 11 cohorts. We have all of their demographics. We factor that into our model. And we did not, on purpose, use any data from that newest cohort. So we're going to build our model from all of the previous cohorts and try to forecast what this newest cohort is going to do as a test of how robust our model really is in being able to forecast patterns of data that it hasn't even seen. And we use data from the other cohorts to estimate what we call our cross-cohort Changepoint model. Okay? So just to come back to the example I showed earlier, what I'm talking about is this bottom right cell. So the 2000 cohort we're holding out is that brand new cohort, and we're trying to forecast what those donors are going to do in the future. Okay? And the question, of course, is, well, how does our model compare with other state-of-the-art benchmarks that existed prior to our research? And what we're going to do is we're going to see how well it predicts the transactions of the newest cohort from 2003 up to 2006. So 4 years into the future. And our metric is the average percentage error. What actually happened and what did our model forecast versus some of the other state-of-the-art benchmarks. And to kind of get to the results here, what we find, we built 2 separate models within our Changepoint model framework. So the bar on the far left is our full model, and what we're able to do is we're predicting the future transactions of this recent cohort with an error of about 15%. Okay? So to kind of put it in perspective, we're making predictions about a cohort about whom we're using no data and getting the number of donations within an error of 15% over 4 years. So that is fairly robust. What we also did, our full model is, shall we say, computationally complex. So we wanted to develop a lighter version that might be computationally easier to work with. So that's what I call the light version of the model, and we find that we're able to achieve close to the same level of performance. We give up a little because it doesn't have the same level of sophistication. So far, so good. The question is, how does this compare to current state of the art? Are we really making improvements on what's available? And the answer to that is yes. So here I show 2 benchmarks which represent fairly sophisticated models themselves. So the one that's second from the right is a model that says, hey, all of these cohorts are really they're all the same kind of people. We're just going to take an average across all the donors we have. So this model doesn't really believe that there's any changes that could have happened to the nature of the customers being acquired. Unfortunately, that assumption results in a forecast error of about 40%. So about 22 percentage points higher than our model. And another model that uses more of a regression approach to forecasting also does not do very well. So the key insight here is our model is able to forecast what this newest cohort is going to do with far better accuracy than the current state of the art. So having established this, the next obvious question is why? Right? So what's driving this? And this brings us to sort of the diagnostics. Let's dive in to see what exactly is this model picking up that these other benchmarks are not. So to do that, here what I show is we're analyzing several dimensions of behavior to understand if there are any regime changes as you acquire customers. And we find in one of those behaviors, which represents sort of the loyalty of the customer base, we find that around 1996, there's a fairly high probability that the nature of the customers being, or donors being acquired since then has changed. So if you remember, 1996 was the time of that regulatory change. So it looks like it's had a pretty instantaneous effect on the types of donors who are being brought in from 1996 onwards. So this is one of the things that our model has picked up on, because it's looking out to pick up for these patterns that current state of the art, it doesn't assume that these kinds of changes are possible. Secondly, we also find there's more bad news for this nonprofit, that in general, all customers are becoming more attrition prone over time. And this simply reflects that as the deregulation of the cable television market continued to just result in more and more competition, people have 50, hundreds of channels, there's less and less loyalty to this honorable public television broadcaster. So we did find evidence for that shift in 1996, but there's a general pattern as well that our model was able to pick up on. So to put it together, the diagnostics that we were able to come up with were, one, the model suggests that cohorts of donors acquired in 1996 or later are fundamentally different from the ones before. And to make forecasts on these newer cohorts, if you're using the older cohorts data as some type of representative benchmark, well, that might not be a good idea. So in other words, in the era of big data, not all data is good data. So you want to use the relevant data and borrow that information to make the right forecasts. So we did find all customers are more attrition prone over time, and we did find we were able to quantify, well, what did that regulatory change do to this customer base? And fundamentally, that the changes show that donor retention strongly affected by cable competition. Now, what I will say is, in this case, it was nice that we had a regulatory change to see if our model would pick up on those changes. But in the course of regular business, those changes may not be as evident or obvious. And that's when our model is even more useful, because it can serve as an early detection warning system, where it's trying to find that, hey, something's changing about the customers you're bringing in. And hopefully that allows managers to dive in and diagnose why that's happening. So it's not always necessary that there's a macro environmental change. It perhaps may be even more relevant when we don't know what's causing a change, but the model tells us something's happening to the behavior of these customers. Right? Finally, what we also found was, when we added those demographics, that added very little predictive power. So in contrast to what we might typically think, that we will identify who are our likely donors or customers by looking at demographics, we found that who people are mattered a lot less than what they did. Those patterns, the Kathys, the Ritas, their patterns of behavior revealed far more about what we could expect from them than their demographics. So we had them in there, they didn't play a large role.
Did age play any impact or life stage?
The
Age or life stage play any impact in your model?
It certainly did, so there was some effect. The predictive power was not high, but what we did find is the older customers were actually more loyal. So the younger ones, perhaps, again, you've been watching this television channel for 20 years, there's some residual effect of age on donation patterns. But by and large, it was dwarfed by the other variables. That's exactly right. So there was some effect of these demographics, of course. And I think higher income groups were also more likely to keep giving as well. And households size also played a role. But minimal in terms of forecasting accuracy. Good question. Yes?
Your measurement endpoint is donor yes or no. Does your model can it also be used effectively in the amount of donation?
Absolutely.
Sooner or later you have to have a budget.
Yes. So to demonstrate our model, so what the organization that we worked with asked us to do was to forecast engagement.
Ask the question the way you asked you to do it?
I'll buy you a beer later. But thanks, Dick. So what? It's very easy to add monetary amount to the model. In fact, capturing how much people are going to donate is very straightforward. So we didn't do it in this particular set of results, but it's very easy to add that. That didn't really change in terms of the amount that people spend. What changed was some of these other patterns.
Could I do one more?
Of course.
The pillar of your research are those three things you're measuring.
Yes.
I can't recite them exactly.
Recency.
But
Yes.
are those three things universal for all kinds of markets, or are they
Like the stock market?
No, this kind of stuff.
So again, our model actually is more general than that RFM suggests. So in this case, those were the important metrics. But what I would say is, you could take the behaviors that are of importance to your firm's
So
setting.
you have to figure that out first.
Yes.
Okay.
And you have to decide what you want to measure, what aspects of your customer's behavior. So if you're an e-commerce website and you want to measure how many times they log into the website, then how many times they click on that email, those are all behaviors. Those could replace the recency and frequency, you could replace them with these other analytic measures, and then you could see whether there are some changes in terms of how your newer versus your older customers are behaving. Mark?
Two questions really. What's the size of the post-sample data set? Is it 4 years? How many people, how many cohorts are involved in that?
We're looking at one cohort with about 8,000 donors.
8,000 donors for 4 years.
Yes.
Okay, so that's fairly convincing. And secondly, give us a little bit about the model. Can you give us the light version of the light model, lightly?
The kind of what the model is based on? Sure. So we use, I reduced the details, but this is using some high-powered Bayesian statistical models. So in a sense, as I said, we have a model that captures what each individual is doing, but there are also hierarchies that capture the effect of the cohort that individual is part of, and on top of that, the entire customer base. So we have a multi-level hierarchical Bayesian model that's actually running at work, and to compute this, we had to use the parallel computing resources of the Amazon cloud. So we did have to, for the full model, leverage some sophisticated computing resources. But the good news is, with computation being so cheap, that is going to be more and more scalable over time. But that's sort of some of the things underneath the analysis that we did. I think I have a question with Amit.
How critical is the assumption about non-contractual versus contractual? Even in contractual setting, you have forecast for 4 years out,
Correct.
and they could just decide not to subscribe to Netflix. So is that assumption important for your model? If you take that out, will your model still hold? It didn't matter whether it's contractual or not.
It absolutely will. So we went
For us, please. Repeat the questions.
Yes. The question is, I made a distinction between contractual and non-contractual business settings, and we're focusing on non-contractual. Amit's question is, what if it is a Netflix-style contractual setting? And the answer is, it is absolutely applicable. We went for what we considered the harder business challenge. So contractual would easily, again, be accommodated within this model. It would actually be perhaps more accurate in a contractual setting because you don't have to worry about, is this person churned or not? Because in contractual, you know that. And it's purely then about looking for differences across cohorts. So it actually simplifies one of the challenges, and our model is still very applicable. So I think I only have a couple of slides left. So just to summarize what this model can do for us, it offers these dynamics or diagnostics on multi-cohort type of behavior. So what we're proposing is, instead of thinking about all of your customers as one big group, here's a new way to slice them by where they are in their life cycle, which cohort they're part of, and looking at the health of each of those cohorts separately, because like I said, how you might resolve or market to these customers may differ based on the cohort that they're in. And this is not typical in the customer-based dashboards that we've seen companies using, but I'd love to hear if you all have perspectives on that. And we're definitely saying go beyond just the ads and the total number of customers in measuring the health of a customer base. And like I said, this can serve as an early warning system. Something is changing. If you don't know what the underlying cause is, might be a good time to go look for what might be driving these changes.
Are you suggesting that your model can be used for segmentation? Is that like to segment the market? But this is purchasing, is the ability for a cohort to go back and purchase, right? So is your segmentation, if this can be used for segmentation, will look for the retention aspect of the business? Tell me more.
So it's a great question. So we're proposing that segmentation can be expanded to looking at where different customers are on their journey with the firm. Your oldest customers have been around for a while, they're in a different place. And to treat them or market to them the same way you would your newest customer might not always make sense. And so this model can offer that slicing of segmentation, and then it's up to managers, as I'm going to, what can you do with these diagnostics? I'll say a couple of quick words on that. But yes, absolutely. We're proposing there's another dimension along which you can do segmentation. Of course, we improve forecasting accuracy, and we leverage all of the data that we have available, but we use what's relevant. So we don't just assume all the data are good. Say, let's find the data that are relevant. There are changes, there are regime changes, we need to account for those. And it's generally applicable to any business setting, as I mentioned. So the example I presented to you, our model isn't specifically customized in some way that would make it inadmissible. In fact, we made sure that it's a very general model. And finally, just looking ahead, this would be kind of my concluding thoughts. I'm quite keen to examine this model's success now in a variety of industries. So I would be very excited to talk to anyone who would like to talk about these diagnostics, and the paper is available, but I'm also available to chat about that and to see what light can we shed on different types of business settings. Does it perform better in some settings and not others? Love to kind of generalize that. And finally, to use these diagnostics to think about, well, if the health of a cohort isn't that great, well, what can we do to fix that? And I would love, again, to talk about doing some field experimentation to try and test whether some of these diagnostics will actually result in increased value. And so that's what I would conclude with. John?
Sort of the traditional look at RFM was used in banking and fundraising, even telcos when they had video on demand.
Right.
The challenge with the models is you kept going after the best or the highest RFM, you had a tendency to burn through your models. When you model the predictive behavior of future outcomes, do you take in that burnout, or how often you're paying the same customers into consideration?
You mean like the marketing
Yes.
aspects themselves? So in these models, we did not have marketing data, so that would be, I think, a very interesting thing to look at as to whether the effectiveness of marketing might be cohort specific and the intensity of that. So I don't have an answer, but I think it's a wonderful area to explore. So other questions?
I'm also curious about, as you think about the life cycle of that cohort, is there a point where the value back to the corporation increased? It seems like you looked at engagement in a binary fashion as opposed to the dollar amount.
Right.
So is there a point during the life cycle where you would tend to see engagement from a dollar perspective?
So what we found, at least in this data set, is that each individual had sort of a certain amount that they were comfortable with. So there were sort of your $50 to $100 people, your $100 to $200 people. We didn't see a whole lot of change over time in the amount that people were giving. And perhaps it's relating to the context. If it's a banking situation, maybe you might be able to upsell your customers. There might be an uptick. But here, you're donating to your local public television station, so you have a fixed amount that you generally feel comfortable with. So we didn't see a lot of movement on that dimension. Hence, I didn't focus as much on that. But it could absolutely play a part in other settings where, with time, you're shifting the kinds of products people are buying, and all of those could be very interesting dimensions to study.
To follow up on that, could you control for requests or estate gifts? Because those obviously aren't going to repeat.
We took those out of the data.
Yes.
So we were only looking at people who are making these choices year after year. So yeah, those big gifts, those are not in these data. obviously they're handled very, very well. Yes, Sean?
So my question is a permutation of what he asked, and something that I've been questioning the whole time is, again with that monetary piece, because you're looking at the predictive power of the model in predicting whether someone's going to give. Did the size of the donation, so again, that hierarchy, you've got recency, frequency, monetary being the least, I guess, the least of the powerful levers.
Diagnostic of predicting whether you're going to engage.
Thank you. Yes. So did the size of the donation, though, have, for anyone that had a, let's say, a stratospherically high donation, did that have any power, predictive power, in determining whether someone would defect or increase or maintain? Did you see any of that in the model?
In this data, and again, I wouldn't make a general statement other than the particular context. We found that monetary values seem to be somewhat orthogonal to kind of the recency and frequency metrics.
Okay.
Hence, we felt comfortable in saying, we can look at each individual, how much they're going to spend. If we make a forecast that they're going to make 4 donations, and this is a $50 person, prediction would be you're a $200 donor. And that's how we calculated that. Okay. In this data set, we did not see evidence that the monetary amount provided additional predictive power.
Okay.
That's not to say that would always be the case.
Sure.
But
in aggregate.
Right. In aggregate, we found that the number of donations was more critical, and the amounts you could look at, like segment people by what their average spend was, and that was fairly stable.
Great. Thanks.
Parent branding will understand the IT implications and all the formulas of your model.
Sure.
Would just a very normal person reading your paper be able to do? I know, for example, if you were at DuPont, you probably couldn't understand it. At Monsanto, you would find this very easy. Right. How hard is this to work with your paper, or do they need you?
I would suggest someone on your statistician team or technical staff, read the paper, and I think talking to me would be probably best. The paper is written for a technical audience in marketing science. It goes deep into the algorithms, the modeling, but in terms of how to port it to your application, I would be probably the best person to contact, but any of your statisticians or in your technical team, they might be able to take a look at this paper and say, yeah, well, I can work with this model, but it would require some technical expertise. So I would not recommend reading the paper from beginning to end, and enjoying that process. Unless you want to, have a nice way of going to sleep at night.
A Washington U application. I'm thinking of alumni and development, where you take this and then you add the next layer of complexity, which is involvement and giving. Okay? So you take this model and then you layer in the implications of going from joining the Century Club, Elliott Society at various levels, National Council trustees, and then there's another type of involvement one, coming to your 5, 10, 25, 50th reunions. Kind of gives you a lot of value and really allows you to come up with some real creative types of things for alumni and development that would have real impacts for Washington U.
I think that would be a great application. I fully agree. We have all of that data.
And David Blassingame is a Wash U MBA, so he'd have some understanding.
I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Dilesh. Definitely follow up with David.
We have time for a few more questions, if anybody...
Does your model handle external events like economic downturns or socioeconomic events that we've had a lot of over the last several years?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things we can do with this model is you can have covariates, just like we would do in a regression model, where you might, and we had some of those, whatever we could collect over this time period, but you could posit that, well, other than cohorts changing, there might be some macro factors. And if you could collect that data, maybe it's interest rates changing over time, whatever that variable is, we can absolutely incorporate that in the model and then tease apart how much of the effect is because of the customer cohort changes versus just kind of things changing over time versus effects of macro variables. So our model already has the structure to bring in additional pieces.
And the other thing, kind of thinking on that, is micro too, with social media. There's other, at the individual person in the cohort,
right.
Like a life event, or as you were saying earlier, a death, or maybe they inherited money, or something's going on in their particular life. Would it get to that level someday if that data is rich enough?
I think I would think of that as more dimensions of individual behavior. So expanding on this RFM, now you can throw in social media activity and so on. So we can expand the richness of what an individual does within the framework of the model. So it's very flexible to what you're interested in about the customer and what they're going to do in the future. So both of those are possible. Karen?
Well, I guess I'm, as a marketer, certainly concerned with retention, but also with birth of new customers. And so I'm just curious if you have thought about or looked at whether there is some type of correlation between birth, the new customer coming on, with recency. And if somehow, you saw in different years that we had a higher correlation in certain years, it might be explained by factors like we're going to get rid of funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or you had a particularly good marketing campaign or something. But it would be interesting to take it, use retention to try to see what does it have in common with birth in that birth year. Just a thought.
I think that's an interesting thought. So we haven't done that, but you're saying there could be this correlation between acquisition and retention.
That's how she can understand your model.
Absolutely. So I think that's a really interesting suggestion for future research. So thank you for that suggestion.
I have a question. Could you apply this model to finance? So instead of thinking about cohorting, renewing, you could look at upticks in the price of an asset and apply similar data-heavy analysis to predict movements in asset prices. It could be over a few minutes or over the course of days.
I suppose that would be possible. I haven't thought of the finance setting, and I know there's work in finance that tracks macro changes with time series models. I don't see why it cannot, but what I'm not sure is whether that's been done in other systems. So, but there's certainly the possibility. So any kind of data, I think that changes over time. There are multiple dimensions. Maybe there are multiple assets that you're interested to track. I think that would fit the broad definition of the problem we're trying to solve. But we were focused on customers and behavior. So I think at a high level, yes, but I need to think more.
That's good. Okay, that probably does conclude our time together for today. If, like me, you found this research compelling, want to know more, please take a copy of the paper. There's some copies outside the registration desk, or drop Arun an email, and he'll be glad to send you a link to the PDF. But it comes with a health warning, remember. It's probably better if you employed Arun as a consultant. Okay. So, and the more generally are always willing to discuss their research with you and how that might be applied. So, again, please drop any of them directly a line if you see something that catches your eye, or contact me or contact Dorothy at the Cohort Birth. So, it's been a great pleasure to have you here today. I found that extremely illuminating. I'd like to thank Arun again. Congratulations. I'd like to thank